Hey everybody who decides to watch this video. Um, First off, if you noticed, I was not on social media since November. Thanks for caring about my existence. And if not, no big deal. I'm not butthurt. Um, but I wanted to really make a video about mental health because in November I had a breakthrough in my therapy. Uh, I'll start that off with my therapist sent me a video about meditation, and she didn't preface it with anything other than, I think this is a video about, very good meditation techniques I think would be very useful for you to implement. And so I was intrigued because my therapist has worked really well with me, and, I wanted, to do anything to feel better and better myself. And lo and behold, it was an ADHD meditation video. And up to this point, ADHD had never been on my radar. It's not something I ever thought about. It's something that I really didn't even know anything about, really, other than just kind of what the stigma is around the disorder. So I start watching this video, and the guy in the video has ADHD. And up to this point, I had been gaining a lot more self-awareness of things that I was doing and trying to get to the root causes of, negative behaviors and habits, because I really want to be different than how I have been up to my, 26 years of life. And so as I'm watching this video, and in the beginning, he's just talking about what it's like having the disorder and stuff. And I'm listening to this stuff, and it just, the light bulb clicks on, and I'm just like, oh my God, I have fucking ADHD. And it blew my mind. Like, it was not something that I even was thinking about. It's just what I was already realizing about myself. Hearing it from another perspective, from somebody who doesn't know me, never had a conversation with, and it blew my mind. And then I immediately was obsessed with figuring out more information about the disorder, and I quickly went into YouTube and started researching, watching videos from Russell Barkley, lectures, Thomas E. Brown, Daniel Amen. They're like the three leading psychiatrists when it comes to ADHD, ADD. You can kind of use those interchangeably. It just depends on the psychiatrist and how they view the disorder. But that was my breakthrough moment. And then I got assessed in January by a psychiatrist, because I didn't want to just be that guy who's like, oh, I went on YouTube and I watched these videos and I figured it out myself. I have ADHD. And I wanted that shit to be fucking facts. And I found out more about the disorder, the fact that it actually affects you cognitively, with processing and working memory. Because I am combined type, which means I am inattentive and hyperactive and impulsive. And the signs were there when I was a child. I wasn't on the extreme side. I had friends, I was social, I was outgoing, but I was extremely hyperactive. My attention definitely wasn't really there for a lot of things when it came to school. When it came to video games, easily have always been able to focus on that kind of task. But with schoolwork, I always really struggled to focus and really push myself to get things done in a timely manner, instead of last second procrastinating and rushing to get things done. And usually when you rush, you're not doing quality work. But I've done a lot of reflecting on my life, which has kind of led me to figure out what was going on with myself. And the interesting thing about the disorder is that it can present differently in everybody. No one person with the disorder will be exactly like the next. It is a kind of spectrum disorder from mild, moderate to severe. And like I said, I wasn't necessarily on the extreme side, even up to this point. I mean, I definitely have some things that are more extreme, but I'm more on the moderate side of things, which is still not fantastic by any means, but it could always definitely be worse. I've always been one to be more internal when it comes to things. There are people with the disorder who externally act on things, like if they have thoughts growing up, say when they're a kid, and they want to punch somebody because they make them upset, and they act on that, and that part of the brain, the inhibition, executive function, is the part that's supposed to stop you and say, hey, that's really not a good idea, you shouldn't do that. And obviously as a kid that's a little different, and then, as you get older, it becomes more obvious of things that you shouldn't do. But that still goes into adolescence and adulthood, and that's something that I didn't know, that ADHD actually wasn't just something that affects kids and just magically goes away. It's a genetic disorder, so it actually carries with you for most cases into adulthood. Only 1 out of 3 people by the time they reach adulthood actually stop being affected by the disorder. Which I find pretty fascinating. I find the whole thing fascinating with the disorder. But one of the big things with the disorder is regulating emotion. And for me, I always noticed, especially when I became a teenager, I really struggled when my emotions ran high. And I'd always make really poor decisions in those moments, because that's that impulsiveness ties in with that, is I feel like I'm going insane or something, and I have to do something now, like something has to happen now, and then I'll be okay, like I'll feel better, whether it's I have to say something to somebody, they said something that irked me and I really needed to get something off my chest, or some other kind of self-soothing action. But normally those options that I pick in my head between option A and option B, both are terrible. They don't provide outcomes that really benefit the situation or myself. So with that being said, a lot of what helps with me is the ability to stop and try to refocus. Because that's something that a lot of people with the disorder struggle with, is in those emotions, or those state of emotions, realizing that it will get better, and you don't have to do something right then. You can stop, try to calm down, do something to get your mind distracted, acknowledge your feelings, and process them in a more healthy fashion. And, once you calm down, you can come to a more rational, logical decision that actually benefits your long-term welfare and provides an outcome that actually is beneficial. And that's something that I've struggled mightily with up to this point in my life. Because the impulsiveness ties in with that regulating emotion, and they call it emotional impulsivity. And you're just impulsively doing something in those moments that you're not thinking enough about, which is ironic, because people with the disorder think a lot, and I'm one of those who thinks a tremendous amount. Any given day, I just have a lot of thoughts that come in through my mind, and a lot of that ties into the default mode network in your brain, which is the part of your brain when you're not actively thinking about something, and it just throws any kind of random assortment of thoughts. It could be something you had for dinner last night, it could be something you planned out with somebody for next week. I mean, it can quite literally be anything. But it can also be negative thoughts, and I, as much of a positive person as I am, and optimistic and happy and smiling as many people know me for, I actually have struggled mightily with negative thoughts and negative self-talk about myself. And it's been really hard to kind of realize that that's been a thing for a really long time for me. I never wanted to think of myself as a negative person. I always wanted to think of myself as ordinary and normal. And so, with that being said, to just think that I've dealt with this stuff for half of my life, just negatively thinking about myself and these automatic negative thoughts that kind of come into your mind that are self-defeating and hurtful to yourself really affect your self-esteem and your confidence. And I really didn't have any growing up. I was bullied a lot from the first grade until I was a sophomore in high school. I was called weird. People made fun of my looks, so I never found myself to be very attractive. It was just really hard. I kind of cut off some friends that I held dear because on the social ladder I felt like they were dragging me down, and I didn't want to be made fun of any more than I was or picked on. And with that comes with a lot of self-soothing techniques. So with the disorder, dopamine is one of the big factors that plays into people's lives. People that have ADHD have a higher ceiling for dopamine. So somebody who is neurotypical, say their dopamine levels start here, whatever thing that they do that can give them dopamine, they can hit their ceiling quicker than somebody who's ADHD whose ceiling is up here. So for them to do the same task doesn't hit that ceiling of dopamine. So people that are ADHD have a 70% more likelihood to form some kind of addiction, alcohol, substance abuse. For me, it was porn. From the time that I was 12 or 13, I got into porn and very, very quickly was latched onto it. And up until the time that I was 18, I watched it 365 every day. It was a nightly routine for me. And obviously, as a young teen and stuff, I did not have the self-awareness that I have now. And I didn't view porn as a bad thing. I mean, it was the one thing that made me feel really good. There's shame and guilt that came with it. But it's just that rush of feeling really good, was quote unquote worth it for me. And from 18 to 22, I watched it probably about half as much, which was still a lot. In hindsight, really, it still was a problem for me. And so much so that it was something that, I'd think about at work, think about when I was out and about. It was something that really just dominated my thoughts. And something that I'm sure a lot of people can relate to is almost like a computer virus eating up all this space in your head. And that was something that happened to me quite often with many kinds of thoughts, where very quickly it was something that it was all I could think about. And, in those moments, it's like that would lead me to impulsively act on that because that was the only way that I could get it out of my head. But with that being said, it's not like it's done and it's not going to come back. It did, and a lot. Even after I stopped watching porn cold turkey when I was 22, pretty much every day of every week of every month of every year since, it was something I still would think about. And something like that's very puzzling when you don't want to think about something and it's not something you really want to do deep down, but it's still something that pops into your mind and you still have that drive to do it. And that's the shitty part about being addicted to something, is you don't want to do it, but yet there's still something inside of you that drives you to want to do it. And even if you do it and you still feel shame and guilt afterwards, it still wasn't enough to stop me. The risk versus reward was, not something that really was able to prohibit me from wanting to self-soothe, which really led me to have a bad relationship with women. It led me to engage in risky sexual behavior, and it opened me up to a lot of rejection from women. I chased after a lot of girls and was rejected by the vast majority of them. I kind of had that nice guy complex in my head where, you think you're a nice guy and, that's something that should get you a woman, even though no man is entitled to any one woman just because we're interested in them. So that's a big thing that I realized reflecting on my life that really negatively affected me, and I've hurt people dear to me that I hold close to my heart. But not everything is bad. I did go to a place called the Amen Clinic, which does brain scans. And it's really cool. They do these brain scans, and you get a brain scan of your brain, where the blood flow goes in your brain, because the disorder affects, all the lobes of your brain. Primarily, your frontal lobes and your prefrontal cortex, and your cerebellum, basal ganglia, and there's some others that I'm not remembering right now, but it affects a lot of things. And I was able to see exactly in these scans what was going on with my brain. I mean, it was pretty trippy to see where my brain is not getting proper blood flow. But it was really eye-opening for me. I was able to see which parts of my brain are also overactive, which lead to anxiety and depression, which is something that I also struggled with since I was a teenager. I was very anxious, and it's something that I never even thought I had struggled with. As dumb as it sounds, I didn't know what anxiety really was. I didn't really, it's not something I talked with my parents, but it's something that I realized since I was a teenager, that I really started to struggle with it then. And fast forward to now, it's like, geez, I've been struggling with anxieties for a really long time without ever, being able to treat it and address it. And I've struggled with being depressed. I've also struggled with suicidal thoughts a lot since I was a teenager. Just wanting to kill myself and not be here anymore. And a lot of that had to deal with the bullying that I went through, and just wondering, why should I be here anymore? What's the point? But it didn't stop when I wasn't being bullied anymore. I also struggle with just thoughts of dying in general. Mainly a lot of the time when I'm driving on the road, particularly, I'll just think of what would it be like if I drove into oncoming traffic. Would my car explode and burst into flames? Would I be incinerated immediately and die? Would I be burning and still alive? How would my family react? How would my friends react? And it kind of just, this whole movie plays into my head of what exactly would happen. And it's pretty fucked up. It's pretty weird to think that, you're playing out this scenario, which is awful and terrible for no reason, really. I mean, why should anybody think about something so terrible about themselves? But the disorder is not all bad. I'm a very passionate person. When I have genuine interest in something, it's very apparent. But when I figured out I had the disorder, it was very hard to focus on any of the potential positives. It was really all about the negatives. But I figured out a lot of things, tools and knowledge that I've gained through therapy and the research that I've done on the disorder and figuring out how it impacts me as a person, that have really helped me from November to now to really come out on the other side of things and become grounded, understand my true center. But something that I can really say is beneficial is looking at things through a bird's eye view between you and others, and really takes a certain amount of honesty with yourself. You really, really have to be honest, even in those situations where you feel like you were so justified to be right or whatever you may have done to somebody else. And really evaluate and analyze, because that's something that I do a lot because I got very political. So analyzing perspectives and that kind of thing was something that I grew very accustomed to doing. And so I kind of just had to apply that to myself and my past. And that's what's really allowed me to get to this point today, is really kind of cutting the shit with myself, and getting very real, very raw. And it's just been very, very eye-opening. There's just so many habits and behaviors that I would continuously fall into. And I got to the root causes of all of these things, and change doesn't happen overnight. It just doesn't. Even if you realize all these things, you can't just change overnight as much as we would like to. And that was certainly the case for me. But every week I've gotten some kind of progress. I've had weeks that were worse. I've had weeks that were better. But every week I was making some kind of improvement. And that's what I was able to focus on to keep me going, to keep me motivated. Because we kind of create these goals in our heads that can be very hard to attain in the time frame that we would like. And that's something that I do a lot. And so if you create small goals that are much more attainable, you're able to actually, complete these goals, and you can feel good about doing that. And it makes it much easier to actually stay motivated and not lose sight of what your long-term goals are, because you have to do things in the short term that affect your long term. And that's something that I always was in the short term. I had long-term goals, but what I did in the short term did not line me up with my long-term goals, and that negatively affects my long-term welfare. And that's something that I've really gained sight of now, is what I do now in the short term that affects my long-term goals and long-term welfare, so I can have better outcomes, surround myself with people who care and love me and support me and want to see me at my best because I want to be my best. And I hope, if you've watched this entire video, that what I was able to say, which wasn't everything, because that would be a very long video, more longer than it already is, that this can inspire you to look inwards and be able to implement change in a positive sense that not only can benefit you but benefit those around you, because when you become the best version of yourself and you realize your full potential, it only goes up from there, and those who love you and care and support you are only going to be more enthralled with the progress that you can make. And I really just want to be kind of a beacon for change in that regard, because you don't have to have the ADHD disorder to struggle with any of this. It's these kind of things anybody can struggle with, but those who have the disorder just typically struggle a lot more with these kind of problems. And so that's it.